Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. There are new developments tonight in the standoff between a Nevada rancher and the government agency he has owed for 20 years. The confrontation between the government and heavily armed militia members who support Cliven Bundy and his family's insistence on not paying the Bureau of Land Management for cattle grazing rights ended without a shot fired. We are finding out tonight just how far Bundy supporters were ready to go.
We were actually strategizing to put all the women up at the front. If they're going to start shooting, it's going to be women that are going to be televised all across the world getting shot by these rogue federal officers.
When the government wisely backed off rather than let something as horrible as that happen, the Bundy family and their supporters declared victory, even though the BLM and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid says it isn't over.
And we can't have in America people that violate the law and just walk away from it. So it's not over.
For their part, the Bundy family sees themselves not as welfare cowboys mooching off the government and breaking the law while other ranchers pay their dues, but as victims.
It's these agencies making these codes and saying they're laws, and then they got law enforcement and judges and prisons and courts and everything to enforce those laws when none of them have been legislated and they're all unconstitutional. All of them. And that sentiment is why so many showed up to support the Bundys as they stuck it to those tyrannical bureaucrats. And when it comes to tyrannical bureaucrats to stick it to, if you think the Bundy family is worked up about the Bureau of Land Management, wait till you see what Republicans think of the IRS. The RNC picked today to file a lawsuit accusing the agency of illegally stonewalling their request for documents. Senator Ted Cruz tweeted out #abolish the IRS, #tax day in 3 words. And Congressman Steve King, and I really love this one, sending out an email noting that, quote, abolishing the IRS would not only remove the burden on taxpayers to fund their services, but also end the IRS's reign of political witch hunting, adding, please stand with me today and send $25, $50, $100 or whatever you can this tax day. There is perhaps no greater villain for conservatism than the tax man. And here is the reason why.
And I think the simplest and best solution is we need to abolish the IRS.
It's time to abolish the IRS.
And I thought, I'd like to get rid of the IRS.
It's time for a change, and America has awakened to that.
Most people don't feel that warmly towards the Internal Revenue Service. They're the folks that many are writing a check to on this very day. But without the IRS, or something like it, we wouldn't have a government. In fact, it's the cornerstone upon which the entire edifice of the federal government is built. And that is precisely the reason conservatives have so consistently taken a sledgehammer to it. In fact, they've been at it for years. In the 1990s, Newt Gingrich focused much of his agenda as Speaker on abolishing the agency, even launching a national Scrap the Tax tour. In 1998, House Republicans voted on the Tax Code Termination Act, which intended to scrap the IRS as we currently know it.
The truth is, no tax expert in America actually understands the entire code.
It's too complex, it's too onerous. It needs to go. We need to pull it out by its roots.
Under George W. Bush, Republicans were at it again, trying to get rid of the tax code with the Fair Tax Act of 2003, in 2005, in 2007, and 2011. Today, the Fair Tax Act of 2013 lives on. It would also abolish the IRS, the income tax, and calls for the repeal of the 16th Amendment that allows for the income tax in the first place. In other words, goodbye to the last 100 years of American governance. That, however, is an uphill battle, even for an empowered right-wing. So instead of getting rid of the IRS, Republicans have very successfully hollowed out and hamstrung the agency. George W. Bush did his part by slashing the number of lawyers who audited wealthy Americans. Today's Republicans are picking up right where he left off. The House subcommittee last year pushed to cut the IRS's budget by 24%, despite the warnings the cuts would devastate the agency. And even though they didn't get their 24% cut, in the bipartisan deal passed late last year, the agency's budget will be $950 million less than it was in 2010. But conservatives don't just go after the agency's budget. Equally important is destroying its reputation. They want every American to loathe and fear the IRS as much as they do. They've warned of an army of IRS agents who would be collecting Obamacare fines.
Anybody want to fire some IRS agents? Why don't we start with the 16,000 IRS agents that are going to implement Obamacare?
For almost a year, they've gone to war with ex-IRS official Lois Lerner over allegations the IRS improperly targeted conservative groups.
When I look at this Lois Lerner, IRS babe, I see somebody who is miserable, mean, vindictive, unhappy, and vengeful.
But of course, this is not about Lois Lerner. This is about the fact that not only is the IRS tasked with collecting taxes from wealthy people, it's now tasked with regulating the dark money in our elections that wealthy people use to elect people to gut the tax code and the IRS.
It's either Lois Lerner or the general counsel of the IRS or somebody at the White House saying, or somebody at the Treasury saying, the IRS better get on Crossroads GPS.
Conservatives recognize that one of the only things standing between us and a genuine plutocracy are thousands of anonymous bureaucrats doing the basic work of enforcing our nation's laws.